Hi, all my Literati people. Welcome to my January conversation with Tatjana Soli, author of The Lotus Eaters. This novel got a ton of conversation on my app, Tatjana. People were so intrigued by it. My Literati group is called The Beach and Beyond, and this book definitely fell into the beyond.
Very
I
beyond.
Yes. I read it. I was in Australia, I'm going to say 2011. It was in paperback, and I took a bunch of books with me for my trip to Australia, and I took Lotus Eaters. One of the reasons why I took it is because I had, in 2010, had traveled to through Vietnam for 6 weeks and absolutely love the country. We can talk about that a little bit later. And I fell madly in love with this book. I mean, it is such a romantic book at base. I feel like it's a love triangle, but of course it has a million other things going on. So let's start. Can you tell us how you came up with the idea? What was it about this topic that fascinated you, and how the Lotus Eaters came to be?
Well, so it was my first book. So you kind of don't know what you're doing. So I took on way more than I could actually handle because it was historical and that's not my time period. I was a little girl during that time, but none of it was firsthand. So I did a lot of research, but my mom had been a researcher at NATO, and then we moved to California to Fort Ord, and a lot of the soldiers were coming back from Vietnam. So it felt like something that was in, my wheelhouse, something that I wanted to understand more. And I knew soldiers, and I had met them when I was little. And so I read all the big Vietnam books, kind of, growing up and going to college, and Tim O'Brien was my hero and all that.
Right.
But I very much wanted to write a different book that wasn't from the soldier perspective. And so I thought the photography is kind of like the outsider, the artistic, or maybe just the reporting, like somebody who doesn't know what's going on. And so that kind of gives the reader the way to get into this really kind of heavy, dark subject matter. But it's very much based on the characters and about them getting through this, experience, and about their relationships. So I always think of it as kind of two-pronged. It's recent historical, but it's also obviously about characters and relationships and stuff like that.
Totally. So many things I want to ask you. All right. So when you said you read all the big Vietnam books, I mean, you must have done just a ton of research because your Vietnam is so beautifully evoked. It has a little bit of an element of Graham Greene. I'm sure you read The Quiet American.
Oh, of course, yeah.
It has that feel to it at the beginning where Helen's at the Hotel Continental, where, and it was so funny because I had read Graham Greene when I went to Vietnam, but I hadn't yet read your book. It was not yet out. But there is a romanticism to that sort of colonial period and the hotels and the Americans in Vietnam. And yet at the same time, I mean, that is the problem, right? The problem is that Vietnam is a country that's been colonized first by the French, and then, the Americans were in there and the British. I mean, all of these people sort of dictating what happens in the country. So that's also part of the problem. How did you grapple with sort of, because I think you strike a fine balance of finding like the real Vietnam in there?
Yeah, you always have kind of like writerly goals. So I kind of wanted to have this, of the books that you talk about that aren't just the soldier things, there is a kind of romanticism about the period and about the colonial past. And I wanted to start there and then have her kind of, go underneath that and have become more realistic, more gritty, more really the country, more really the people. And not many books from a Western perspective really go into what happened to the country, what happened to the people. So I would say, to me, it's more what a woman would see. She's more concerned about the devastation to the civilians, about the just devastation to the villages, the huge humanitarian crisis that's going on.
Right.
So I didn't want it to just be a reporting thing. I didn't want it to be a research thing. I wanted to have that romanticism there and to kind of balance back and forth, because you still want the reader to go along with you. Sometimes if it gets too hard, it's just too hard to read.
No, right. Exactly. I mean, you don't want it to become too political. People will put it down. I mean,
And yet I was really involved in the politics when I was writing it.
I'm sure.
You submerge it beneath the rest of the story. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure. I thought it was fascinating that Lynn. So, I mean, there's so many things going on. So, Sam and Lynn are friends, and then Sam and Helen fall in love, and I think I really connected with their love story. It was so complicated in a way that I really like the fact that he was married at home, and maybe it was like sort of like a sham marriage. It's unclear, and they were obviously very deeply in love, but it was sort of time and place specific. Like they were in Vietnam together under these incredibly intense circumstances. My favorite part of the book was when they go down to the South and they sort of have that like idyllic month or two.
Good. That's one of my favorite parts. I like that. It's a quiet section, but I love that,
Yeah, because
kind of a resting place.
Yeah, it feels like a resting place in the book, and for the reader, it's like, oh, that we can like sort of because I mean, the beginning of the novel alone is so stressful, where she has the little girl, and you're not sure what's going to happen, and then she's in combat so much, and it's so stressful that then when she and Sam go to the countryside to live, it's like this sweet spot in the book. And even the second time I read it, when I knew he was going to die, it was just so poignant to me, and I loved it. I loved it so, so much. Have you traveled in Vietnam?
I actually went for the first time when the paperback came out,
Wow.
just on my own, because I had been living in this things for so long. I just wanted to see it. So we did a bunch of pictures, for the paperback campaign. And it was just really cool because we had a tour guide, and I talked to him about what I knew. And then he corrected me on what, like his experience. He was very young. So this would be like his parents' experience of the war when they were young.
Sure.
But yeah, it was amazing experience. And it was really fulfilling to see the country has come back, and that there's not much hostility towards Americans, and you just feel so happy for, that history has gone on, and something good came out of it eventually.
No, absolutely. I mean, I found that too. I was there in early 2010 for 6 weeks, like I said, and we started at the bottom. We were in Saigon overnight, and then we went up the coast. And I mean, we were on like vacation. I had my little kids with me, so we hit a lot of the tourist spots, but we went to Hue, which is their historic, ancient town. And I mean, and then to Halong Bay, and I mean, it was and Hanoi, all of it was so fascinating and so rich. And I
was very aware, because I did kind of that tour too. I spent more time in the South, in the Cam Peninsula, but then when we started to go north, especially Hanoi, you realize like that was the enemy territory. No American books, nothing was ever set there. There was no descriptions of it, right?
I know.
It's forbidden. And now it's this cosmopolitan, beautiful, sophisticated city with restaurants, and it's just it was a really interesting experience for me as a person being involved with that material, to see that.
I bet. And like Da Nang, so we were in Hoi An. Hoi An is, in my opinion, was the jewel of our trip. So Hoi An is the cobblestone streets. For those of you watching who haven't been there, it's cobblestone streets and these 300-year-old teak houses that they've turned into shops and restaurants, and the motorbikes stop at 6:00 and they turn on classical music, and the streets are strung with these colorful lanterns. And we would go into town every night with the kids and have dinner and stroll the galleries and do the shopping. And I'm like, this place is magical. And yet at the same time, it is mere miles from Da Nang, where so much horrible fighting took place. And so in a way, it's really tricky to reconcile like the beauty of Vietnam and the purity of that culture with all of the horrific things that Americans have experienced. I know that some of the readers in my group, had a very difficult time, just sort of from a mental perspective, reading this book, because they grew up with, the body counts on the news, and you can talk to 10 different people and have 10 different takes. When the book came out, Tatjana, did you get any pushback from people about writing about the war?
Like, why? Because I hadn't experienced it,
No,
or?
just like I don't know, like were people like, I don't want to read about this. It's too recent, or it's too painful, or it's still like too horrible in my memory, that kind of thing.
Especially because I did a ton of women's kind of, where you go like a ballroom and you have all the women and you
Sure.
have multiple writers and everything. And I always felt like the orphan because so many people say, well, I'm sorry, I don't want to read that kind of book. So
Right.
there was a little bit of that. And I think the publishing, getting it published, they thought like, oh, does anybody want to read this? This is really difficult stuff. And I think that's also part why I put a heavy finger on the characters and everything.
Right.
Um, I think it is a difficult book, but I think most of the women that read it said, "Oh, I'm really glad that I read it," and they had relatives that had been into it if they hadn't had firsthand experience. And so they said this really just made me understand that time period, and it was nice to do it in a piece of fiction.
Yeah.
Um, I had a lot of soldiers. This was my concern because, as a writer, your concerns are different. And I was just worried about the Vietnam people that people had written about, the soldiers that had been there. Like, are they just going to be, really offended that I tried to go into this area? And
Right.
I only had people that were really positive and they wanted to share their experience with me. And I felt really honored, like they said, a couple of the men had said, I stayed away from that material for so long. And, I decided, well, this book, yeah, I'm going to give it a try because it doesn't seem to be like, that graphic and everything. And they said, yeah, it was a good reminder of some of the more positive parts of it,
Yeah.
because it does have, it's not negative only. It's, dark, but
No.
there's hopeful
Right.
kind of
Right.
some.
It's very nuanced and complex. And the thing that I liked about it, which I feel like my readers really liked about it, is that we have a female protagonist, right? And so I can't even name another piece of literature that deals with Vietnam with a female protagonist. And you said a little while ago that you chose photography because it gives her a little bit of a distance. It seems like when she shows up, she really doesn't know what she's doing.
She doesn't. And, a lot of people said, I think you wrote that kind of clumsily. Didn't you know what, it would have been a photographer from a magazine or newspaper sent there. And I said, what, I really wanted to have her be a total amateur, neophyte, because when I read so many of these firsthand accounts of journalists, they were all men. But
Yeah.
most of them, they were like teenagers. They were 19 years old, and hey, let's go to Vietnam. This could be fun. And they literally just bought a camera and they started taking pictures and trying to sell it. So there was a lot of that. And that is something that's vanished. It could never happen in a war now anymore. And so I thought, and you didn't have to have permission to be there. Now you have to be embedded. The story is very controlled. I loved that kind of freewheeling. It was the Wild West for the journalists to be there.
Right.
And I liked having that.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I hope that answers for those of you who are watching, because a lot of people in my comments were like, what was she like? She just showed up. And that's a great answer, is that's how it was. Like, it wasn't like it is now. Like, I couldn't just take my iPhone and go to the newest area of conflict. Like, obviously, but back then that was how things rolled.
And that was the first war that actually was like that.
Okay.
So it's kind of cool. And I just thought, if I don't put it here, nobody will ever know that was that way,
Right. Oh my gosh, that's so absolutely cool. Okay, so and then so we talked about Sam. So let's talk a little bit about Lynn. So Lynn is, in fact, a spy for the Communist Party. Yes?
Yeah, I mean, kind of, sort of. Yeah, I mean, and that was like part of the heavy duty research, is that I really wanted to get what was going on. And because you've been there, it's such a small country, and you put this artificial division of the North and the South, and and the Americans put this artificial division in the communists and then pro-Americans. They didn't see it that way, and most of them, just like the wars now, most of them are just civilians and they're trying to survive. And it's depending who's, pressing on them, what allegiance they take. And so he's very much a person who was caught up in all of that, and he has no choice but to do what he's doing, but he doesn't do his job very well. So I would consider him, not
Safe.
disloyal.
Right. He's not that
Yeah.
dangerous because he really does not give them any good information. It's so
Yeah.
funny because in some ways Lynn is um he's like we are. He is attracted to the characters. So we don't really, when we're in the novel, we don't really care about the politics. We care only about Sam and Helen. And that it's sort of the same for Lynn. He's very devoted to Sam and he's very, very devoted to Helen. And that is really his war and his conflict is with them, I think, and between them and losing his wife. And I mean, all of his story is so interesting. So at the end, because I've had people ask me, I think I understood it. So at the end, she stays. He leaves in the helicopter. People asked on my format, why did you make that decision? Why did you have her stay and him go?
Well, first of all, he's wounded and he has to leave.
Sure.
I mean, you're not
Right.
going to get medical care
Right.
while
So we
during the
know why
blast.
yeah.
He could potentially have died or whatever. I was fascinated the more I read about, and I still am. I still follow all the combat and war photographers, the New York Times and everything. I mean, it is a unique breed of people. They sacrifice everything, life, family, everything to cover these stories, and at great personal risk. And many of them do get hurt, and they do it anyway. And I really wanted, especially a woman, to be that strong as any man. And she's now, after all this time that she's become a professional, she wants to cover the biggest story in the world, and she's not going to go with her man and leave the country. And I did at the different events and everything. Yeah, people were like, well, she's selfish and she's this or that. And I said, you know what if it was a male character? Would you think
Right.
that?
Right.
No, I want her to be, I don't want her to be a guy, but I want her to be a really strong woman. And so, in this very elite type of professional, nobody would leave if they didn't have to.
Right. I
Yeah.
also really felt like it was a demonstration that she had felt like she almost like physically couldn't bring herself to leave because she had become,
Yeah.
not to say she became Vietnamese, but the country was like in her blood and she had changed. Like it wasn't just that, she was just there sort of I'm going to take some pictures, but she had really bonded in a major way, in a profound way with the country. And she felt like it was her life's mission to stay and see the transfer of power and that nothing was going to stand in her way, even, this man that she was devoted to. So I understood. And I do think that regardless of what your art is, that artists become so attached to their subject that sometimes you just can't separate. And that's sort of how I saw her.
Yeah. And, in a way, there's definitely an aspect of it that it is self-destructive and it's dangerous, people that do that. And in a way, because she loves Lynn, she does realize, I'm done with this. I'm going to, get out of here and be with him. So, yeah.
Yeah. For me, honestly, the part of the novel that made me the most uncomfortable was when she was at home in California.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, she went home. In fact, I had blocked it out because I read it in 2011 and then I reread it a couple months ago. And I'm like, I think I forgot that she went home because I think my mind just blanked it out because I didn't like her. I didn't want her to go home, right? You want her to be with the action. Because that's where at that point the reader feels like she belongs. So I was actually very uncomfortable when she was at home in California.
And I think, part of that is just, especially the people I talk to, so many of them do have PTSD and they do go back and they can't reintegrate to a normal life and go back home because they've had these, experiences that they can't leave. And so, I think when you see her in California, you understand more why she couldn't leave at the end.
Yeah,
Yeah.
at the end. Yeah, because that was really where she belonged. Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit because I want to talk a little bit about your writing life. So after the Lotus Eaters, what happened for you as a writer? Are you did
You know, I've published 3 novels since then, so it was a good difficult first book to publish, but it was a
right?
good book because you know, it let the other ones come out and everything, and I'm still working away.
Awesome. And what is your schedule like? How much do you work? What is your process?
I'm a workhorse. I just, you know, I've kind of like, I think once you get the discipline, it's hard to let go of it. It's like somebody who works out all the time. So I'm always working. My husband says like you're a workaholic, but yeah, I always have to be doing something. And when I'm not writing, I'm very nervous and fidgety. So
Yeah, I know, me too. I mean,
yes.
I'm always working. And what about reading, Tatiana? Like, what do you like to read? What books have you read recently? I feel like my readers are always so curious about, you know, what writers read.
Yeah, I was telling the lady was speaking to before this, during COVID, I really enjoyed doing some of these book clubs where you do the classics. So during the beginning of the pandemic, I did War and Peace, and we did Anna Karenina. So you
Yeah,
know, that was kind of to do it with a group, and I'd already read them, but it was nice to do it in a communal kind of a setting to revisit the classics. Recently I've just been, you know, I end up always, even though I've written one contemporary, and I'm working on 2 books right now, and one needed a lot of research. So I'm always doing research related reading,
okay.
but then I also come up with, you know, books. My two raid pile is like high,
Yeah,
always like a whole bunch. But yeah.
I'm sure. And how would you say publishing has changed for you personally, like since the Lotus Eaters came out? Like, have you noticed a change just in like people's tastes or how you find yourself, like the subjects that you choose to write about, or how sales are going, or ebooks, or marketing, or social media, all that stuff? How do you feel about all of that?
You know, I think, you know, there kind of have been pluses because we have the Zoom ability. So I'm watching author events and I'm participating in different events, and people across the country that would not, you know, be talking to me, I can do that. So I find that much more interactive and fun. I really enjoy that aspect. Um, I don't know. I think right now we're in a kind of a very interesting period where we're a little bit shy about what we write about. So I'm working on 2 books right now. I tend to pick more difficult subject matter, and I think you're very aware of what you're writing and the authenticity that you can bring to it.
Right.
When I first started writing, I would write about anything, and I was just figure if I can write about it, then I will try. Now I'm more conscious that there's certain stories that I want to write that are in my area, and other ones that I won't touch anymore. So there
Right.
has been a shifting that way, and you know, I think, you know, publishing it's a pendulum and it goes to extremes a little bit. So
Yeah.
it's interesting. I would maybe be more nervous to have written Lotus Eaters now than I was even back then, but
Right.
I'm
No,
glad
great.
I did it. Yeah,
I
yeah.
totally get it because the way that people read and critique is different, and so maybe someone would say, well, okay, well, you wrote from a Vietnamese man's point of view. Should you be doing that? Like, should you be
And,
doing
you know,
that?
I think that is totally wrong. I do. I think you should be able to write about anything, and if you do it well,
Right.
and if you do it thoughtfully and, you know,
Yes.
with empathy and all that, you know, if you do it poorly, you should have never written it, and you'll pay the price for that. But, you know, if it's something that you want to write about, and I had actually talked to Tim O'Brien when I wrote The Lotus Eaters. I said, you know, "Can I write about this?" And he said, "Absolutely. You know, if you have something to say, don't ever let anything like that hold you back." And I think that should be for all of us. All of us as writers, we should write about what we want.
Oh,
So
I completely agree. I completely agree. And yet at the same time, it's such a challenging landscape at this point. Like what is okay and what's not okay. I love Tim O'Brien so much. I am so just jealous and in awe, but that makes so much sense that you would talk with him. Did you watch the Ken Burns documentary?
It's strange, but I have avoided it because
Okay.
it's very it's I'm one of those people who avoid the books. I was so immersed in that, and I'm sure as you as a writer, you pay a price if you're doing heavy duty material. It's kind of hard, and I just know that after I watch it, it's going to take a lot out of me for a while. So
Yeah,
I'm kind of holding it maybe between books that I'm gonna go in and watch
right.
it all by myself with my Kleenex and
Yeah, I know. I mean, it's long. It's 9
yeah.
hours long or however long. I did watch it. I wrote a novel called Summer of '69. It came out in 2019, so I was writing it in 2018, mostly. And so I watched the Ken Burns documentary for that reason. And I had a character that goes to, that's in the army who goes to Vietnam. And I have one of my best friends was a Marine in Vietnam. And so I used him as my, who to give me all the information. But the reason I ask is because Tim O'Brien is interviewed in that
Mhm.
documentary and is so, oh my gosh, the story about when the letter comes and what his parents said. I mean, it was so, wow, like super powerful. And he has done a beautiful job of evoking the Vietnam War. So anyway, I'm excited
Yeah.
that you talked with him. Okay, so I'll just ask a fun question in conclusion. Do you binge anything on television? Like, do you stream any shows? Any
I love, yeah, that's a definite thing that happened during COVID. So my husband and I, we go in front. I'm addicted to Succession,
Oh, me too.
Man, I think I've watched most of them twice. So, and as a writer, the writing is so good. The scenes are so well constructed. So yeah,
I know. I
another.
actually say I do find that like watching really good TV now is just as instructive. Like I'm famous for saying, like, when I tell my readers in my book group this, the only way you can become a better writer is to read. That is my belief. But watching really good television and listening to really good writing like Succession, which I do think is the best show on television, is so instructive.
Yeah.
Is so instructive. So what is it about that show that's so addictive, Tatjana? We have to figure it out.
Well, the characters are just awful, but they're awful in a really good way.
I know. It's very strange. What else are you watching?
What other? We just started watching. I think it's called Hackers.
Okay. Yeah. Hacks.
Hacks.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Hacks. She's smart. She plays
Right.
a
Yeah.
comedian in Las Vegas. That is just a great woman production with a
Yeah.
young female writer from LA that's down and out, and so she becomes her writer, but she's not happy about the job, and it's about their evolving relationship, and it's set in Las Vegas, which is just such an interesting setting. I can't think of anything else I've seen that was set there like that.
That's so okay. I'm going to put that on my list. I'm watching Yellow Jackets. Have you heard about Yellow
That's good.
Jackets? Okay. I'm in episode 10. I'm going to finish tonight. Basically, as soon as I push leave meeting, I'm going to finish. It is the most mind-blowing show. And you think it's for teenagers. It's not. It's very adult. And I have to say it is absolutely extraordinary. So you definitely
Okay, I'll put it on my list.
want to put that on your list. And in closing, do you want to say anything about work that you have coming out in the future, or do you want to keep it under wraps?
I am very keep it under wraps.
We will all be looking forward to it, especially me. And I want to say thank you for coming on.
Thank
And
you for having me. It's been fun. I haven't talked about this book for a while, so it's nice.
I know. It's been one of my favorites for, I guess I'm going to say 10 years, the last 10 years. I've just really held it in very high esteem. Anyway, thank you so much for talking with us. And I know everyone is going to enjoy this. All right, guys. Thank you so much.